Yeah, thank you. Apologies about the sound. Um, it's all right. So Kisilu's going to be going. It's actually quite soon. In 2 weeks, he's going to be going to Norway, and then after a series of screenings and talks in Norway, he's then going on to the climate talks in Paris, and he'll be there for the full 2 weeks. So it's quite an exciting time, and it's sort of a continuation of the story. So they're using that. They're using a lot of his footage. It's his video diaries that are then being used as a piece of to lobby and to show to delegates at the climate conference. So it's part of the conference. There's lots of fringe events as well, but there's also his climate diaries are being shown to delegates. So it should be quite it should be quite strong.
To go back to the beginning of the film, to start our discussion, could you tell us a bit more about how you and Julia came to know Kisilu and his family from the beginning?
Yeah, so I came aboard 2 years ago, and so Julia started in 2011. So she'd already been working on it for a long time before then. And I think she'd gone out to make this sort of film. So she'd gone to Kenya and this part of Kenya, Mutomo, which is in the East Kenya, and looking to spend time with a farming family and on a research trip. And so 2011, she after 3 weeks, she finally met up with Kisilu. And the idea was to do a film about the impacts of the changing climate on a farming family. And further north in Kenya, the effects of the drought were being felt much strongly, but the thinking was actually was that it's in Mutomo, it's actually a very rich farming area, and so in the north there is already a lot of desertification, so the change has actually already happened. And so actually in Mutomo and the farmers there, this is the first time that these effects are being felt. So that was the choice behind that. And so that was so 2011, and then that turned into there's a lot of versions. So it turned into a undergraduate film, and then later on it turned into an MA film, and then that's when I came on board, and we got Norwegian film funding behind it and Al Jazeera behind it, and so it turned into a 48-minute film. So it would have been 2.5 years ago that we gave Kisilu a camera eventually, and so he was then we were getting tapes being sent back. So that's how we organised getting hold of the video diaries. And so these packages would arrive. It would be through different people in the area, and we'd sort of make sure they got to Nairobi, and then they'd arrive back in Nairobi. There was one package that got lost in Oxford, and then eventually someone delivered it to us in London. And it's all quite exciting. Like, we had no idea what he'd been filming. And so I'm watching these tapes for the first time. It was an exciting process.
And to follow up on the format of having Kisilu record himself and have these video diaries, was that a method that came to be due to difficulty traveling to shoot with him, or was it a decision as far as driving the storytelling and approaching the story from a different way? Can you?
Yeah, I think it was much more that, and Kisilu's character. So when Julia first started filming with him, he was really interested in the filming process, and so just got involved in that way. He's not in the film, but he's also uses his camera to earn money as a photographer, and it's a stills camera on his phone. So he's the community photographer. So he's into images and he's into storytelling through images. Anyway, so it completely made sense to him, and it made sense to us. I don't think it wasn't actually because we couldn't get out there enough. It was much more that it's much more intimate, and I think that Julia's footage is incredibly intimate, but I like the way it's sort of intercut, where you can't actually tell necessarily who's behind the camera. Sometimes it's Kisilu, sometimes it's Julia and her DOP, who's Julie, two Julies. And I really like that. I think that's a slightly unusual, makes for a slightly unusual film.
I'd like to open it up to audience questions in just 1 minute, but before I do, to follow up on your earlier comment, filming in Kenya, how much of a crew was there shooting with Kisilu and his family? Was it mainly Julia and one DOP? Because it's remarkable how much his wife opens up to the person shooting, and there's a very visible closeness between everyone there. Can you tell us a bit?
Yeah, so it's tiny. I mean, the whole thing's made on a sort of shoestring. So it's a tiny crew. So it's Julia and Julie, just the two of them, and they've gone to 5 trips over the last 4 years, roughly a month each. So it's spaced out. And 4 of the trips they went deliberately at the beginning of the rainy season, and each time the rains never came, and twice they did. One time they came and there's a storm, and the second time, or the third time it came and there was a flood.
I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience now. If anybody had a question, you'd just like to raise your hand. The microphone will come to you. Any questions?
You're using it in Paris, obviously. Sorry,
Yeah.
Tanya. Are you using it locally as well, nationally in Kenya?
In Kenya, there are plans, yeah, for sure. So it's just been finished. So yeah, there are loads of plans. I'm working with groups, and there'll be a screening. I think so it's carrying on, and I think we'll film, or definitely Kisilu will film the screening of the film, and then that footage might then end up in the longer film. We don't know.
Hi, sorry, Joe. I'm really curious how you managed to get it screened in front of delegates, because there's this terribly cynical part of me, having worked at the UN and having worked on climate change for many years, and seen some amazing climate witness programs and leaders brought in from the Pacific, and we've seen hunger strikes from the Philippines, and I'm, part of me was sitting there going, I thought it was I should have said I thought it was wonderful, and I absolutely loved it, and I'm just curious how you got in the door to get it screened now, when there's so much out there in a way, and yet we know it's not always reaching the right ears, or.
So it's through an NGO called Spira, the Norwegian NGO, who do a lot of youth. It's a youth campaign NGO, and they have 5 different issues, and one of the issues is the environment. But it's a big network of. They have 50,000 members who are actually signed up members, but they go out to all the schools in Norway. So it's a big Norwegian organisation. They've done all of the legwork of getting it there. They were the people who invited Kisilu the first time round to Norway to that conference 2 years ago. I could find Spira. I'm sure they'd be happy to.
I saw another question in the front.
Do you think he would have been invited to Norway if it hadn't been for the film, for the fact that you were filming? How did it happen? It wasn't really.
Yeah. Okay. Julia's Norwegian, so the reason that they saw the footage was because of that.
Julia gave it to them.
Yeah. And so then that invitation. So I guess getting the message out has been. Getting the message outside of the direct area has been the production crew, as opposed to Kisilu's direct work.
The other
I'm not criticising because of that, but it would be hard for someone in a village like that
Right, yeah.
to achieve that, wouldn't it?
Actually, what happened to you, if I may say so?
How do you know?
Julia worked for this small NGO that made children's NGO films, and she went out and met Kisilu, made a little film in the first place, and that was seen by many, many other NGOs in Norway, and that sort of got the ball rolling, and that got Kisilu to Norway. And then she came onto this course I ran at Isadok, if I may say so, and pitched it to Al Jazeera, who liked it. And then I said, you better go and work with Hugh Hartford,
You're right.
who is a friend of mine, and he will sort of curate the film. And yes, you've done terrifically well. And so that's how it began. I mean, the point was about Julia, if I may say so. She's one of the only NGO filmmakers I know who has the creativity and the real skill to turn a simple, very simple NGO film into what will become a festival film eventually and win awards via a TV film. I mean, that doesn't often happen. And she had, from the beginning, when she came on my course, she had the creativity and the desire to get out of the NGO straitjacket, as it were, into bigger films. And that's why I show this myself when I do presentations, because you can go that route if you want to. But it was the NGO backing that paid for it initially, that got the networking going and made it all happen. But then she took it off and ran with it and made it bigger. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good.
Are there other questions that I've missed? Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about how they, the film crew, filmed the story without interfering with the story? It's the old problem. I mean, did they turn up every day from their hotel? And when this family is saying, we've got no food, were they tempted to say, well, we'll bring you some food or what? It's an interesting dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah, and we talked about, they helped in short. And by being there, so they would stay for a month. They stayed in the town, Mutomo, and then would come out. But a lot of the time they'd stay overnight at the family's house. And so they helped in terms of they wouldn't be a burden on the family at all. So they would bring food for themselves, but obviously they would bring food for the whole family. So the idea was that they were in no way a burden. But no, it's a really delicate line to play, and so the motorbike was a sort of interesting dilemma, in that came out of these early screenings of the NGO screenings in Norway. After the screening, people wanted to help, and so they'd raised enough money to buy a motorbike. But obviously, that then Julia is involved with the family's life. But I think it's something that I think that's a relationship that they're gonna keep for a very long time. So it's sort of just on a personal level, you would help out. I mean, so Julia and I would talk about it a lot. It's difficult, or it's an interesting issue. But it was never a reason not to do something. It was just an interesting dilemma.
Yes, a question over here.
Hi. Was Kisilu planting trees before the film crew came out, or was that a kind of idea suggested by?
So that chronologically, that's how it. So it was after the first storm.
Yeah.
There was so Kisilu he'd been doing he'd been practicing alternative farming, and there's with the tree planting is sort of alternating different crops and improving the quality. It's all about improving the quality of the soil. And so he'd already been doing that, but the big passion in planting trees happened after that first storm. But that came from him. His community work, then also that all came afterwards. Yeah, it's a good question. I think they're carrying on. So it was difficult in the edit because the trees actually got surpassed by him and his relationship with his wife, and him and his relationship in the community, and him wanting to be accepted in the community, and him turning into a leader. And so it was with the irrigation system as well, so the government paid for an irrigation system. In terms of story, it's sort of actually, it doesn't solve climate change, or it doesn't but actually what we're witnessing is a person on a journey becoming a leader within his community and also resolving difficulties with his family along the way. So actually it's a much more personal story. No. Right, yeah.
So we had another question in the front.
There are just one or two elements that were unexplained in the film. For instance, here he is a man with 9 family members to support, and at one point he's shown ploughing with 2 young oxen, or zebu cattle probably. Are those community owned?
I don't know. Adam, do you know? So
Because
the
otherwise the animals don't seem to appear on his
yeah, it's a good
farm at all.
there's
So there is a community element to begin with. So there's been a community element there to begin with, where they share things around. They share those oxen, yeah. Good.
Yes, a question here, and then I'll come back to the front.
Yeah, just in terms of these questions of, I guess, intervention and the use of putting it in the story for whatever outcome you're wanting. There's a point in the film where it kind of shifts to Kisilu talking about climate change. And I'm just wondering whether it's worth, it feels quite sudden for me, and I'm just wondering either whether you decided not to put up the foundations of that, or whether there weren't any. I mean, you know, how you came to talk about that, and also because that relates directly to, I guess, the planting of trees and when that started. And I'm wondering if that was a decision because it isn't the most, you know, it's a short edit and you have to cut that out, or what the background is there.
No, it's a fine line. So the trees, the feeling was that the trees, if we made too much of a deal of it, it would overtake the story, and it would be a story about a man who's planting trees. Because actually it's not, we're trying not for it to be like that. And so for it to become a sort of secondary storyline, and actually the more personal story to overtake. So that was that's the reason. And then the delaying of the mentioning of climate change is quite deliberate, to give it a momentum. So actually you spend the first 20 minutes in family life, and then it gains a momentum.
I guess the question of the sort of the conversation around climate change in all these different environments is something, I think that's maybe where I was like, you know, this word is suddenly coming in without any
Right, where's the motivation? Yeah, no, it's different, yeah.
We have time for one more question before wrapping up. I think I saw a hand there. Okay, we have a question on the side.
Hi there. I just wondered what, in your eyes, success would look like in terms of this project. Like where would you want it to get to? Then you feel like, all right, okay, this has justified our time. And also, are you a bit apprehensive as people might take this as a bit of an anecdotal kind of one-off? You know what I mean? Because I mean, film can, by the time it's been edited and nicely sliced and diced, it comes across as, oh wow, climate change is a huge issue. But how serious do you think, you know, just with all due respect, how do you think people would take this when they see it?
In terms of the solution, I think the idea was never to offer up a solution. So it goes back to the sort of making too much of a deal about the planting trees. Is that what you mean? So that. Right. So at the moment, so we'll be filming. The aim is to film in Paris when Kisilu goes to the climate talks, and so we've got an Indiegogo fund to raise money for that. and how to use the film. We want to. NGOs are already very interested in using the film, and Spira, that I mentioned earlier, in Norway, have been using it for screenings. And so the idea is to have a film that can be a tool, can be used by environmental organisations. So we're not making a campaign film, but we're making a film that can be used as a campaign, if that makes sense.
Following up on that, Hugh, I'd just like to close by asking what, if you know, has changed for Kisilu since the end of the film that we see here, because like you said, he might be doing Q&As and discussing his work more. And can you talk a bit about the impact that these kind of discussions have had directly on what he's doing and the work that he's continuing?
Yeah, so they've not started yet. So in a week, roughly 2 weeks, they're going to start with Q&As.
Well, we look forward to hearing how that goes and what follows that. So if anybody wants to learn more about the film, where would be the best place for them to look?
KisiluMovie.com.
And if anybody here tonight knows someone who wasn't able to make it, please encourage them to watch the film on Al Jazeera on the 2nd of December. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Hugh. And please thank Julia, who wasn't able to be here with us as well. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.